This Jeep is not a four-wheel drive. In fact, it's electric, and it's built on the same platform as cars from France, which isn't sounding very Jeep so far. But this car, the Avenger, is not trying to be a traditional Jeep in that sense. What it is trying to do is bring in new buyers to the Jeep brand that might be interested, want an EV, but not a car that's all EV-ish. So can it do it? We're here driving this car as it lands on our shores to find out.
Before the Avenger had even landed in Australia, a price drop was applied to its pricing. And while that might seem like a move that stems from an increasingly competitive small SUV market and an increasingly competitive EV market thanks to China, Jeep actually says that production costs were lowered and they decided to pass that on to the customers. In any case, the Avenger now starts from $49,990 before on-road costs for the entry-level Longitude variant, with a mid-spec Limited costing $54,990 and the appropriately named Summit at $60,990. There's a bunch of kit that's standard across the range, plus only one cost option being premium paint at $990. Each Avenger gets a dual set of 10.25-inch screens inside, one for the driver instrument cluster and the other a touchscreen for the multimedia controls, centered on the dash so it can be reached by both front occupants. Sat-nav, keyless start, adaptive cruise control and Jeep's select terrain drive mode system are all also standard features. The Limited adds partial synthetic leather to the seats, keyless entry, more safety features, and other things like higher AC charging rates, as well as a two-tone roof option, while the Summit means you get the two-tone roof as standard, plus LED projector headlights and LED taillights, 18-inch alloys, and leather-accented heated front seats with power adjustment for the driver. For a full list of features, go to carsguide.com.au to check out the review there.
One of the biggest draws for the Avenger for me is its design. It still looks very Jeep, and for people that like that kind of rugged off-road look of a Jeep but don't actually need or want to take it off-road, that might be a huge draw for them as well. But Jeep says a lot of the design elements and decisions made in creating this car were done very deliberately, and some of them are quite obvious. For a start, there's 360 degrees of protective plastic wrapped around the car that kind of mean that at a small, low impact bump, you're not going to damage the paintwork or any of the bodywork, which is quite expensive to replace. Similarly, the headlights are inset a little bit from the front of the car, so a low-speed front-on collision is less likely to damage them and cost you a bunch of money. As well as that though, there's a bunch of little Easter eggs in traditional Jeep style that if you have a look around the car, you might notice. For example, there's a lot of little hidden 7-slot grille shapes around the car on the inside and out. There's also X sort of shaped camo based on that same tail light design from the petrol cans. There's a little 3D ladybug in the roof rails on the roof, and on the windscreen there's a little silhouette of the son of the designer of this car looking up at the stars through a telescope. The outside of the Jeep is fun, but the inside has plenty of places to store things and is pretty practical. I don't think it looks massively interesting in here, but that's kind of okay, because even though there's this massive bin down here, one here, and one along here, the fact that there doesn't really need to be any design elements around that is okay. There's like genuinely so many places to put things. Depending on which variant you buy, you'll probably be spending between 50 and 60 and then probably a little bit over for on-road costs. And in here, it probably doesn't quite feel like you've spent that much. There's a few things missing, for example. For a start, I found that the heated seats didn't quite warm up quickly enough. It took ages for them to get properly hot. Another thing again in terms of temperatures is that there's no dual zone climate control and there's no vents in the back for the rear passengers either. There's a few places to plug things in. You get a USB-A, USB-C and a 12-volt plug here in the front, and there's a little plug in the back for the rear passengers as well. In terms of the materials, there are a few that are a little bit disappointing for a car at this price point. For example, there's some hard plastic up here, some scratchy plastic in places you probably will put your hands. Plus, if you're the front passenger, you don't get electric adjustment or massage function like the driver does. There's also wireless Android Auto, wireless Apple CarPlay, and a wireless phone charger in here too. Granted, it's a pretty small car, and if you've got two adults in the front, they're going to be sitting pretty far back in terms of the cabin, which means when we get into the back, I'll show you what that results in. In here, I wouldn't call it spacious. I'm sitting behind my own seating position. I'm 5'11", and my knees are nearly touching the seat in front of me. It's a small car, so granted, adults in the back seat is not going to result in comfort for a long trip, but it does feel a little bit cramped back here. The seat itself isn't the most comfortable, it's fine. I've got some headroom though, which is good, and it feels like the bottom of my feet are sort of just nicely tucked under the seat in front of me. It's okay, it's not the most comfortable, and I reckon if you're about my size, it'll be fine for a short trip. Back here, there's not really many amenities either. Like I said, There's no vents. It feels a little bit dark as well because the sunroof only covers the 2 front seats, and there's just one USB-C plug back here as well. Also, there's no armrest in the center, and the one on the outside feels a little bit far to quite comfortably lean on, so you're sort of just sitting here with your arms kind of not knowing where to go. They've got nothing to lean on, nothing to do. There is, however, a pretty decent 355 litres of boot space right behind me, and if you fold these seats down, that becomes 1,250 litres, which is quite impressive for a small SUV.
The Avenger has just one drivetrain for now. It's a front-wheel drive electric motor, though it sounds like we shouldn't rule out the possibility of other petrol hybrid drivetrains in the future. The EV Avenger we've got is built on a 400-volt electric architecture, with a single motor delivering 115 kilowatts of power and 260 Nm of torque. It does have a mode that increases the regenerative braking, though isn't quite a one-pedal driving experience. Jeep also says it'll hit 100 km an hour from standstill in 9 seconds, but apparently tops out at just 150 km.
Where the fun exterior design meets the practical interior for the Avenger, the driving experience has a similar mix of those two things as well. It's a pretty fun thing and it's quite capable, but it isn't very EV-like, and it's actually a fairly sensible car to drive in the way that most ICE cars would be. Because as Jeep has wanted this to be a car that doesn't feel too much like an EV for people who don't necessarily want to make a big leap in the way they drive, it doesn't feel too much like driving an EV from behind the wheel. And the rest of the driving experience is pretty normal as well. You get a little bit of road noise because it's about 1.5 tons, which is fairly heavy for a light SUV, but not too bad for an EV. The steering doesn't feel particularly direct, but it is accurate. I can't get a lot of feedback through it, and I can feel a lot more feedback coming through the suspension and my seat than I can through my hands, but that's okay because the steering is doing what I need it to do. It's pretty light around corners, it's easy to handle, and you can actually point it where you want it to go pretty easily. It'll do what you want. It'll hold its cornering around relatively quick corners, and even though it's absolutely bucketing today, these tires on the car have done a pretty good job of keeping the grip. There's been no front wheel spin, no torque steering. It's been pretty good. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have a particularly urgent takeoff feeling. You don't get that rush of torque and speed that you would probably get from even relatively underpowered EVs. And this isn't a particularly powerful car, but it has quite a gentle takeoff. One thing that's a little bit disappointing about the driving feeling in the Avenger is the brake pedal. It's a bit spongy, and the first time I went to push down the brakes just at 60 km an hour, rolling up to a red light was a little bit of a shock. I needed to put a lot more pressure down than I thought I would. It took a little bit of getting used to, and now that I am used to it, it's okay, but it's just one of those things that feels like it probably could have done with a little bit more work first. Particularly rough surfaces will feel a little bit bumpy through the suspension, but not in a massively uncomfortable way, and it doesn't feel like big bumps make it feel particularly crashy through the shocks either. There is a mode you can turn on that adds a little bit of regenerative braking, and it's not exactly one pedal driving, but it's pretty good. It's not going to do all of the slowing down for you, but it does help, especially when you're in stop-start traffic and you don't really want to be swapping your feet between pedals all the time. The platform that the Avenger rides on also underpins a couple of other cars, for example the Peugeot E2008, and those cars are quite well liked for their on-road manners. But Jeep's done a fair bit of work to make a lot of this car properly Jeep, and even though it's still a front-wheel drive electric car, it says that it's pretty good for light off-roading. Obviously, with the weather here today, we haven't had a chance to go and actually test that out. It's been a bit muddy, and front-wheel drive tends not to work the best with that, so that might be something we need to test out later on ourselves. But even on light gravel roads and some fairly muddy surfaces, the grips seem to be pretty good. I haven't felt like I needed the car to do any more work than it has to keep things feeling pretty stable and safe.
The Avenger has a reasonably sized 54 kWh lithium-ion battery, which it says allows for a driving range of up to 396 km or 390 in the top of the range Summit due to the specification. Under WLTP testing, Jeep says the Avenger is rated at 15.4 kWh per 100 km, which is 15.8 kWh for the Summit. And it comes with a Type 2 CCS combo charging socket for either DC fast charging up to 100 kilowatts or AC charging up to 7 kilowatts in base longitude and 11 kilowatts in higher variants. At the max 100 kilowatt rate on DC charging, the Avenger should take up to 24 minutes to charge from 20 to 80%, while slower AC charging at 11 kilowatts takes 5 hours and 34 minutes. On the launch drive route, we were seeing between 14.8 and 16.4 kilowatt hours shown on the trip computer, so Jeep's claims seem pretty accurate. The Jeep Avenger hasn't been tested by ANCAP, but comes with a slightly disappointing 3-star score from Euro ANCAP overseas, which mostly uses the same testing. Jeep Australia says it's currently working with ANCAP regarding a potential local score, but wouldn't detail what that could mean. In terms of what the Avenger offers as standard, there's AEB, lane keep assist, traffic sign recognition, driver monitoring, and a reversing camera, as well as 6 airbags, though there's no front center airbag. It's notably missing rear cross traffic alert, and the base longitude makes do with regular adaptive cruise control and parking sensors at the rear only, while higher variants get blind spot assist, surround parking sensors, and intelligent cruise control.
Interestingly, from behind the wheel, I'm actually quite happy with the safety systems in the Avenger because they're not incredibly noticeable, and whether the regulators are happy with that or not is another story. But for me, not having the car beep at me every time I approach the speed limit, exceed the speed limit, cross over lines or approach the middle of the road, as long as I know what I'm doing, I feel pretty confident in this car. It feels pretty safe, it feels pretty easy to drive, and I don't really need it to be dinging at me to tell me what to do, so I'm pretty happy with it being quite unobtrusive.
Jeep offers a 5-year, 100,000km warranty, which is starting to be overtaken by others, increasingly offering 7-year unlimited kilometer warranties. The high voltage battery system, though, is covered for 8 years or 160,000 Ks, whichever comes first. Jeep also offers cap price servicing for the 5-year warranty, with scheduled visits costing just $250 and spaced out at 12,500 K intervals or 12-month intervals. There's also the brand's lifetime roadside assist, but only when you service your car with Jeep.
The Avenger is a pretty interesting proposition here in Australia. It's pretty fun to look at and it's pretty fun to drive, but its price isn't as sharp as it could be, and it's got a few small flaws. As a first crack at an electric car and a properly viable small city car, I reckon it'll definitely draw in some customers, especially with that brand heritage. It'll be interesting to see how many end up on our roads.